That you all are here and you made it through the storm. Enjoy the conference, and without further ado, Dr. Richard. Thank you.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Dr. Demasi. As she mentioned, my name is Dr. Richard Ezeki. I currently work at the Union Concerned Scientists as a New Mobility and Equity Fellow, focusing on the social impacts of new transportation technologies, specifically focused on autonomous vehicles. So as we know, autonomous vehicles are kind of the talk of the town when it comes to transportation, so really learning more about the subject and mostly about how it impacts, communities of color and low-income communities in terms of providing access is my key function of the work that I do at UCS. But I'm glad to step back to my roots a little bit and come back to the annual legislative conference. It's the third time I've moderated a panel on transportation, and every time I come here, I'm really just excited to listen to the panelists and to really get their knowledge about this topic that's so important to us. We also have the pleasure of having our wonderful Congresswoman, Brenda Lawrence from Michigan, and I want to introduce to her so she can give some remarks.
Okay, let me say one more thing.
Oh.
I almost forgot to mention that we have another distinguished sponsor, Uber, Nadia Anderson. So thank you. They have also been with us the past few years, and you'll be hearing from her later. So thank you also for the work that you all do and for supporting this work. I'm really not going to get off the microphone this time. Thank you.
All right. Okay. So, Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence has represented the Michigan 14 district since 2015, which includes a portion of Detroit as well as the city of Southfield and 16 other cities located in Oakland and Wayne counties. She was reelected to the U.S. House of Representatives in November 2016, where she serves as a senior whip, vice chair of the Congressional Caucus for Women's Issues, and secretary of the Congressional Black Caucus. She serves on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, where she also serves as a subcommittee on aviation, subcommittee on highway and transit, subcommittee on water, resources, and environment. She is also a member of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, where she serves on the subcommittee of government operation. She was elected to mayor to the city of Southfield in November 2001 and became the first African American and the first woman to serve in that post. And I really have a special place in my heart because I am a graduate of the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. So I know Detroit quite well, and I have a special place in my heart for Southeast Michigan. So Congresswoman Lawrence, please come up.
I appreciate Michigan, but I'm go green, go white. So I'm Michigan State, but I love Michigan. I want to say good morning, and I'm honored to be here today with you. Just emphasizing that today's topic of transportation and infrastructure from Black women leaders is extremely important to me. I had my session yesterday about women leaders and Black women and our opportunities. It was a packed room of Black women wanting to have that conversation. So what's so special about today is the amazing opportunities in transportation that we need to understand that are available. I want to give you some statistics. I serve on the transportation infrastructure. I deliberately wanted to serve there because I know of the critical need of our investment in our infrastructure. I also serve on the Congressional Women's Caucus, so this is a intersection of two things that I feel very, very strongly about. I want you to know that we in America have kicked the can down the road way too long. We have now put ourselves in a situation where we're almost approaching, as a developed country, we're losing ground rapidly. As you know, I'm from Michigan. So potholes is something I know really well. But something as a mayor that I understood clearly, that water infrastructure in America is extremely important. Flint, Michigan just really ripped the scab off of what our challenges are in this country when it comes to something that is not a luxury, but a basic human need, and that's the infrastructure that we have for water. I'm also from Detroit, so you all know we're the Motor City, and so when we talk about autonomous vehicles, when we talk about electric vehicles, all of that ties back to our infrastructure, because you cannot have autonomous vehicles without having the infrastructure to support that. Because the road has to talk to the car needs to be given electronic and the technology has to be there to speak to the car to make things work. So I had a ride last month in an autonomous vehicle because we're putting them on the road, test driving them. And I had a really unique experience because you know the steam that comes up from the road? Well, that just mess up an autonomous vehicle. They don't know what that is. Is that a person? Is it a thing? Do I stop? You know, what is it? And so we had a reaction in the car. So our autonomous vehicles that we're testing obviously has a human being in there to supplement the car. But it really highlighted to me how far we have to go and how far we have gone in the research for R&D. There is economic development opportunities or benefits of investment in our infrastructure. And I can't say it enough, jobs, jobs, jobs. And black women are not represented in this space. And it's something that I really want to encourage those who have the ability to mentor. Please look at your opportunities that you have to introduce, to bring in, and to support black women engaging in this field. We had a conversation yesterday, and I'm telling people that so many companies are now running to diversity. And it's not because all of a sudden they had an awakening and now they're more compassionate and aware. It's just that companies cannot survive in today's economy without having a full workforce. And that workforce must include people of all ethnicities, religions, age, for us to sustain our economy. Now, I cannot talk about the investment in infrastructure without talking about skilled trades. Now, I am the co-chair of the Skilled Trade Caucus. The average age of a skilled trade worker in America is 54, and we do not have a workforce to replace it. The labor workforce is diminishing, but the skilled trade workforce is increasing, and jobs in the transportation infrastructure environment is heavily dependent upon skilled trades. So I can't tell you how many times in Detroit we have a major construction or road construction project. And in the city of Detroit, where over 60% of the population is African American, they see no African Americans working on the roads. So we've started a concerted effort to introduce people to construction trades and skilled trades. Those are very good paying jobs. So many times people kind of walk away from it and think it's not good paying. I am a strong supporter of higher education, but I'm just as committed to full employment for African Americans and the black community. Now, you can be in the construction trades, even as a welder, and make six figures. And people seem to not understand that. You don't have to work for Wendy's just because you did not get a 4-year degree. Just because you did not get a 4-year degree does not mean you're not smart, intelligent, and have the ability to contribute and have a job. And black women are the most underrepresented in the skilled trades. Almost every woman that I know that's high-ranking in the skilled trades, their father introduced them, or an uncle, or someone introduced them, took them under their wings, and nurtured that spirit that they had and skill to work with their hands. But we're going to have to do more than that now, because black women are missing too many opportunities in the skilled trades. I also want you to know that, let's talk numbers. Every dollar invested in transportation infrastructure returns $3.54, $3.54 in economic impact. The infrastructure jobs account for 11% of our nation's workforce. Where are the women? Where are the black women in that 11% of the workforce? And 14 million people have jobs directly related to infrastructure. 14 million. And from the locomotive engineers and electric power line installers to truck drivers and airline pilots and construction workers are all tied into this 14 million. I also want you to know that these are some statistics you need to know as we have this discussion. According to the American Society of Civil Engineers, if we continue the status quo of kicking the can down the road, not investing in complete reconstruction of our infrastructure, our funding in 2016 to 2025, each household will lose $3,400 each year due to poor transportation infrastructure. And if the gap between what we spend and what we need to address, the infrastructure is not addressed, the economy is expected to lose $4 trillion in the gross domestic product, costing our economy $2.5 million. Why would it cost money if we don't invest in our infrastructure? It's jobs, jobs, jobs. I look forward to the panel. I'm going to be pulled. I'm not going to be able to stay for the whole thing, but please know, as a black woman, being given this amazing opportunity to serve in Congress, to walk the halls of Congress where decisions are made that impacts all of our lives, to walk the halls of Congress that were built by slaves, I don't ever take for granted the magnitude and the immense responsibility. And this whole weekend is about awareness and about creating a sense of urgency so that we know, first of all, we have so much to do, but we have so many opportunities. And I need you to grab hold to them and leave this conference engaged, invested, and committed to making a difference. God bless you. Thank you.
Okay. Ooh, sorry. So thank you for the wonderful words, Congresswoman Lawrence. Next up, I'd like to bring Ms. Regina Dillard, who is counsel for State Foreign Affairs, to provide some remarks as well. Regina?
Well, good morning. Good morning. I have to say that the Congresswoman's remarks were awesome. I mean, it's very enlightening to see how vested she is in transportation and infrastructure, so certainly applaud her for those remarks. As she stated, she represents Detroit and Southfield, Michigan, and those are communities which have provided us with the rich heritage of car manufacturing and also car radios so we could listen to the Motown sound. Yeah. So again, I'd like to thank her. We appreciate her leadership and her voice. On behalf of State Farm, which has nearly 70,000 employees and 19,000 independent captive agents, I, along with several of my colleagues that are here with you this morning, welcome you to what I think is going to be a very thoughtful and impactful session on transportation, as delivered by these esteemed women who are experts in their field. State Farm is the #1 insurer of auto and homeowners insurance. And since we opened our doors about 96 years ago, we have been committed to the safety of our customers and their families, whether they're in their homes or they're on the roadways. Some of our earliest auto policies included policy language encouraging people not to drive when drunk, and also not to drink and drive, and also not to race their cars. As early as the 1940s, we also included information for our policyholders, encouraging them to think about the use of seat belts. And in 2002, we joined forces with the Meharry Medical College to conduct a study to reduce injuries and deaths related to young men and women who were passengers or drivers in cars and not using their seat belts. So we were trying to encourage the younger people to use their seat belts. In 1959, we joined forces. We were one of the founding members of the Insurance Institute for Highway and Safety. Of course, everybody's familiar with the Institute. They're the ones that have the crash dummies. And in 1989, we became a founding member of the Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety. Most recently, we continue our focus to fully understand the safety risks. And in the next evolution of the motoring environment, by researching connected and automated technology. And you heard the Congresswoman talking about automated cars, and I think this laptop is talking. Oh, it's a phone down there. Okay, thank you. In 2013, State Farm became a founding member of the M-City Leadership Circle, which is hosted at the University of Michigan. M-City is aimed at developing a viable ecosystem of connected and automated vehicles. And I think one of our panelists who represents Toyota is also involved in this effort. So we're at the leading edge of changes that will shape the future of the automotive space and transform the way people get around and transform the way they're kept safe. We are a company that is there for our customer, and we're trying to help their lives go right. The ALC is focused on Black women and the many dimensions of their dynamic activism and diverse efforts, and we commend them, especially our panelists today. So without further delay, Dr. Ziki, I'd like to invite you back so that we can introduce the panelists and get started on the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those kind words, Ms. Dillard. I would now like the panelists to come up to the stage and take their seats. Okay. All right. I got there what? Everybody great. Okay. Of course, go ahead. Everybody good? Okay, pass them down. Yes, make sure everybody's got it. Pass one down, everybody. Okay. Okay, are we all settled? Great. All right. So, I will provide a brief bio of our panelists, going from my left to right. And then we will provide an opportunity for each of the panelists to give about 3 minutes, a little more discussion about like who they are and why they got into the work they do. So starting to my immediate right is Dr. Stephanie Brody. She currently works at the District Department of Transportation as a research program specialist. In her role, she supports the development of viable research ideas and projects for the agency, provides support for program management and contract administration, and assists the research intern program to ensure positive outcomes for both student interns and project owners in the agency. She has previously worked at STV Inc. as a highway bridge engineer, and she became interested in transportation planning after she worked at the Maryland Transit Administration. That motivated her to turn to graduate school at Georgia Tech, where she got dual master's degree in transportation engineering and city and regional planning. She continued at Georgia Tech and ended up completing her PhD in civil engineering, focusing on incorporating equity into transportation decision making for program development. Dr. Stephanie Brody. Next to her, we have Rena Davis. Rena currently serves as the Senior Public Policy Manager for Lyft, and she works with local, state, and regulatory officials to provide economic opportunities and transportation options to their constituents. She creates, executes, and manages strategic government relations and public policy campaigns for multiple high-priority Lyft markets, including the largest U.S. market. In this role, she is responsible for directing cross-departmental efforts to create frameworks for the sharing economy as it relates to transportation network companies and autonomous vehicles. Rena Davis. Next to her, we have Kristen Jeffers. Kristen is, her surname, the Black Urbanist, is an outlet for her interest in promoting urban studies and community development. Her thoughts and comments have been featured in City Lab, Next City, Sustainable Cities Collective, Streets Blog Network, Yes Sweetly, Tri-City Beat, and the Greensboro News and Record, and the Coach and the Maji Show. She has spoken as a keynote, led breakout sessions, and served on panels at the Congress for New Urbanism, City Works Expo, American Planning Association Virginia's National Meeting, 2012 UNC Global South Conference, and a number of other summits, classroom lectures, and professional gatherings. In 2014, she released her first book of essays, A Black Urbanist. Ladies and gentlemen, Kristen Jeffers. To her right, we have Dr. Nadia Anderson. Dr. Anderson serves as the Manager of Public Policy for Road Traffic Safety in Uber, where she focuses on developing the company's strategy to promote safety in its ride-sharing platform. Previously, she was a member of the AAA's National Public Affairs team and served as a Manager of Federal Affairs. In this role, her primary responsibilities included advocating for the association's position regarding surface transportation reauthorization, monitoring energy-related issues as it pertains to crude oil and gasoline, and contributing to a variety of automotive issues with a special focus on alternative fuels and advanced vehicle technologies. Prior to joining AAA, Dr. Anderson worked with the American Gas Association and the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers. Dr. Nadia Anderson. Okay. To her right, we have Jay Nobles. Jay Nobles' role is a crash avoidance and advanced technology senior engineer at Toyota North America. At Toyota, Jay supports the company on product regulatory issues related to crash avoidance standards and technologies and emerging advanced technologies such as autonomous vehicles, vehicle-to-vehicle communications, cybersecurity, and more. She works with Toyota's engineers and business strategy teams to make sure regulations and regulatory frameworks are in step with the safety technology being developed and deployed. She engages with several stakeholders, including the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration, academic and research institutions, state agencies, and others on research and regulatory activities. Jay Nobles. And last but certainly not least, we have Chauncey Lunday Russell. Chauncey has nearly 11 years of experience in environmental engineering and over 16 in facilitating community trainings, workshops, and organizing. She has worked on a variety of environmental and infrastructure topics, including air permitting, solid and hazardous waste management, greenhouse gas emission reduction, stormwater management, regulatory compliance, and federal reporting, energy, transportation, and low-impact development. She is also a former national chair of the National Society of Black Engineers and has been recognized by U.S. Black Engineer as one of the top 100 most important blacks in technology and selected by Ebony Magazine as one of the top leaders in the future. And she also currently founded her firm Inspire Green with Veronica Davis. So, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Davis. So, welcome to our wonderful panel. So now, starting to my immediate right, please take a few minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, just kind of talk about yourself outside of the bio that I gave everybody. Kind of tell everybody why you work in this space and what are your motivations to really like make an impact in transportation. So let's start with Stephanie. Move forward to the right.
So as Richard said, I am Stephanie Brody. No, this mic is right. I'm Stephanie Brody. I work at the District Department of Transportation in the research program, and I'm a research program specialist there. So I help coordinate research throughout the agency to answer questions that we have. One of the big projects that I'm working on now is the dockless bike share and scooter share program. So if you've been outside and you've seen the people on scooters and the bikes, that's a pilot that we're having through DDOT right now. And I'm working on evaluating the demonstration period, as well as leading efforts in data collection and analysis for DC, and then also participating in national conversations around dockless data. To give you a bit about my background and a bit of my perspective on transportation, I think transportation is a public good. We all pay taxes to make sure that we're upkeeping our roads, highways, bridges, and transit systems. And this is because we understand that without a functioning transportation system, society will not function. We need access to jobs, to schools, to basic needs like food, social gatherings, and without that access, individuals suffer, but also we suffer collectively as a society. So we know that accessibility varies based on locations. For instance, living downtown versus living in the suburbs, but location is not always a choice. A lot of times it's tied to social economic factors, and that's also steeped in racist policies of the past. And we can talk more about that in the conversation, because in this last minute I have in this introduction, I'm not going to cover that. But it's something that I knew intrinsically when I started in civil engineering, and it led me to my graduate studies in transportation equity, and also led me to my career in the public sector. As a civil servant, our primary goal is to serve, and in my position, I'm able to directly serve the people of DC, the people who are traveling in DC, so all of you today. And as a Black woman, especially with a background in equity, I have a unique perspective and am able to bring equity concerns to conversations and decisions that directly impact those that we serve at DDOT. So I'm very humbled to be on this panel, and I thank you, and I'm very excited for this conversation.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Rena Davis, and I work at Lyft. I've been at Lyft for about 3 years. I'm a recovering attorney and lifelong just policy wonk. Grew up in a very political household, so public policy has always been kind of the fabric of my upbringing, activism, and being involved in those arenas. I knew I think in 4th grade that I wanted to be a lawyer. Even though I'm not one anymore. But I think for me, kind of what drew me to this space in terms of technology, I'm the tail end of the millennials, and so I'm the first generation that has kind of had both an analog and a digital existence. And so it's been very fascinating to see not only this space evolve in terms of the technologies that we all enjoy, from our phones to our computers to even to our vehicles, but to see an evolution in the involvement of tech in terms of public policy debates and conversations. I think the first time that we saw, kind of this tech giant awaken in terms of, weighing in on these conversations was net neutrality back in, what was that, like maybe 10 years ago now. So that was kind of their first way, but I think that they started to understand, tech companies started to understand that being involved with government leaders and community stakeholders was really important, not only for them to continue to be legal, but for them to be able to maximize their products and their uses for their constituencies that they're trying to serve. And so I think for me, what really compelled me to get into that space was the fact that I am a woman, I'm Black, and I have had this kind of dual existence. I've seen this technology and the internet emerge in my lifetime, and I think it's really important that we have a seat at the table to, be a voice in weighing in on those policy debates. There are things that have happened even during the course of my time at Lyft that because I've been in the room and I have that diverse kind of thought process and experience in life, I've been able to add to those conversations in a way that nobody else has, and that's been recognized, and I think that that's something that is really important to me. I think it's also just incredibly exciting. I previously worked a lot in the housing space, and so I kind of always thought that I would end up at Airbnb, but I'm really glad that I didn't, and it's because housing is still a major part, to your points, of transportation. And so it's really fascinating to see, especially I'm from Oakland, I live in East Oakland currently, a place that is traditionally and historically underserved by transit, but there's still a huge role for it and a huge place for it, and really being part of this kind of new renaissance, this third transportation revolution, is really exciting and really important that people of color and specifically African Americans are part of that, given the historic issues with redlining and just the aspects of transportation that we've been prevented from enjoying as our counterparts have been able to. So that's kind of why I ended up here, and really, again, to your point, really excited to have this conversation and be on this panel with these amazing women.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Again, I'm Kristen Jeffers, and so I started the Black Urbanist about almost a decade ago to really talk about two things. I was inspired by my father, who Representative Williams talked about the value of trades and being introduced to trades. My dad, while he was living, was a licensed electrician, and he also really wanted me to know how to navigate in the world, literally. So we used to play with maps on the floor. And from playing with maps on the floor to taking bike rides around our neighborhood, to walking to our neighborhood ballpark, to walking downtown. This was in the era before we were back to the city. In our family, we kind of never left. Both my parents grew up on farm areas in North Carolina. I grew up in Greensboro proper, and that really influenced me to why I wanted to get into this. And again, I've just always been fascinated with how cities work. I also thought I'd be in the legal profession, but I also knew that writing was something I've always loved and enjoyed, and when I get ready to solve a problem, I sit down and I write about it. I'm not a religious journaler, but it's something that's helped me process things, and so that's essentially what I did. I was in sort of my last few years at NC State in undergrad, and I graduated to a world where there were blogs and the early stages of Facebook that wasn't for play, and then this came into play as a professional device, after I graduated from undergrad. And then I'm sitting in grad school because, a few years later, because I'm working other jobs, but I'm reading about how there's all these people creating blogs and making money and even influencing the national conversation around something called urbanism and this idea that we're returning to the city. And I'm like, but I've always been here, so why would I not talk about the city and transportation? And then specifically getting into transportation, it's always been, why don't we have X resource in North Carolina? Why don't we have trains? Why don't we have bike share? Why don't we have this? And so over the years, that's turned from me just being online ranting about it to knowing that there needs to be a place in the mediascape for Black women voices. There, you have City Lab, you have Next City, you have all these places where you kind of get a more male and more white perspective. Not that they haven't been diverse, but I feel like I need to be there, and there's people that I know that I can connect. And again, we still have all types of transportation opportunities and all types of transportation modes and ways of being that we all need access to. And oftentimes in these conversations, especially in the equity conversation, we talk a lot about what people are and aren't doing, but we definitely need to be able to create a multimodal world. And that's why I'm so excited to be on this panel with an all Black women panel, all aspects of multimodal, all the modes. And again, I feel like I'm more of an independent voice at this table, but still, we're here together, and I'm looking forward to having a great conversation today.
Thank you, Kristen.
So good afternoon, everyone. As said, I'm Nadia Anderson. I'm here today on behalf of Uber. I'm a member of our global public policy team where I focus specifically on road and traffic safety. What this means is that I essentially wear 3 hats. So at the company, I get to work very closely with our product, engineering, and design team as they continue to innovate and figure out ways that we can help make roads safer for all travelers. I also get to work very closely with our local teams around the world when they engage in regulatory and policy conversations to show not only the positive role we think we can have as a company, but also what we're doing and how we approach safety. And the last piece is that I'm external facing. So working with road safety advocates around the world, also engaging with the research community to not only understand how they're approaching transportation and the related issues, but also to share how we're approaching it as well, to explore if there are ways that we can possibly work together and sort of move the needle towards getting towards zero crashes. A little bit about me is that I'm a native of the DC metro area. I grew up right across the 14th Street Bridge in Alexandria, Virginia. I moved back after grad school in 2009, and as you can imagine, the city was a lot different than when I was growing up and coming in on the metro when I was 16, and probably should have been asking for permission than going. I've worked in transportation for more than a decade, and have had various roles, and I will say my entire career professionally, I've been a member of what people call an underrepresented group. So being either a only Black person in the room, and definitely most times the only Black woman in the room. Now, what I bring to Uber, what I bring to the transportation conversation, and why I'm excited to be here today is not only being somebody who grew up in an urban setting, it means that I'm uniquely sensitive to the challenges that are related to mobility, transportation, and what this means for opportunities and outcomes. In addition to that, I am a graduate of the University of Virginia, so Charlottesville, Virginia, and also Virginia State University. So I attended an historically Black college as well in rural Virginia, so having an opportunity and understanding of how things work in different places. The last piece is that I'm a qualitative researcher, so my work was focused on low-income and minority communities, socioeconomic issues, and the interplay there. So not only do I know, based on what I've seen and what I've heard, I'm also very attuned to the data and how research is progressing and how that influences the conversation about what actually happens and what gets done. Now, I think as a community and as a demographic, we are uniquely poised to have a very positive impact, not only on transportation, but on mobility, but also on outcomes that are there. I'm excited to be a part of this panel, also the fact that it's happening, because it means that we are poised to take advantage of the opportunity before us. So as with everyone else, I'm super excited and honored to be a member of this panel. Absolutely looking forward to speaking and engaging in conversation later.
Hello, my name is Jade Nobles. I am with Toyota Motor North America, and I'm actually located here in our Washington, D.C. office. So I work in our Product Regulatory Affairs group, specifically our Safety Regulation and Research group. So what we do is kind of interface with our regulators, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, on vehicle safety regulations. How I got here, I've actually always been a fan of automotive safety. I've been a car girl growing up. And so I was introduced to engineering in high school by my pre-calculus teacher. I had no idea what engineering was back then. She was just like, hey, you're really good at this math stuff. You should try this out. I'm like, okay, sure. And so I go to the summer camp and at actually the University of Virginia, which is actually my alma mater's rival, but was introduced to all the different disciplines of engineering. And one really stuck out to me. It was a female researcher, PhD student, and she was showing us and demonstrating her research on impact biomechanics. And they're actually located not too far from IHS, which Regina mentioned, where they do a lot of vehicle crash testing. And I thought that was so cool. I was like, that's it. That's what I want to do. I want to crash cars, and I want to crash cars for Toyota. That's it. And I was like, and I went back and I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And so I started to pursue that. Wanted to work in the automotive industry. Ended up going to Virginia Tech, majored in mechanical engineering, and in any way possible, just kind of got my foot into any type of automotive project or class or whatever. Ironically, I am looking for jobs, and I get hired as a crash avoidance engineer. Even though I wanted to crash cars, I'm now doing crash avoidance, which is way better. I think it's the future. So I'm excited about it. While there's still a lot of room and improvement in the crash worthiness, the impact biomechanics side of things, the future is getting to zero crashes by preventing them in the first place. So in my day-to-day job, I see safety as pretty objective, I think, but I do go to a lot of conferences and I go to a lot of meetings and I'm engaging and networking. And like Nadia is saying, I'm the only minority, I'm the only girl in the room. It doesn't bother me, but it'd be nice to see a little more diversity. And so I think outside of my day-to-day in my workday, I am involved in NSBE and the NSBE DC chapter. I'm also involved in the Women's Transportation Seminar DC chapter, and so particularly the Transportation Youth Program. So I'm encouraging high school students to get into engineering and specifically get into transportation, get into the automotive industry, trying to increase, the pipeline of getting them interested early on into the automotive industry, even though it's not traditional. It's moving. Toyota is moving more into a mobility company versus just a traditional car, metal engine company, and so trying to make that a little more appealing. And yeah.
Thank you.
I don't have a way. This was a very common phrase in my household. I didn't grow up in a house with a car. And in DC, that sounds okay, but I grew up in Selma, Alabama, where that is not okay. You need a car. And so I'm very aware of missed opportunities. And it's something that I never really thought about until one day I sat down and I was thinking about transportation, and I realized all of the opportunities I missed because I didn't have a car. I was offered the opportunity to participate in a gifted program as a child, but I didn't have a way. I remember the piano instructor asked me why was I taking lessons anymore. I didn't have a way. When I quit my job at Quincy's, for anybody who's ever lived in the South, Quincy's used to be home of the big fat yeast roll. It was because the money that I was paying in cab fare was more than the check that I was getting. I didn't have a way to work. And I was just in high school. And I know what it's like for people who live in communities where sometimes the conversation is so intellectualized that we're missing that there are communities where folks are driving an hour just to get to a doctor. They don't have a way. Or they are doing Uber and Lyft, but it's the call your auntie and ask her, can you get a ride? Call your friend. And so I come to this space very humble because I know that there are so many people who they just don't have a way. And when we started Inspire Green 9 years ago today, Veronica Davis and I, and if you know Veronica, you know that she is like a transportation, like eat, sleep, breathe, transportation is what she thinks about all the time. When we started Inspire Green, we started from an equity framework. How do we make sure that all voices are at the table? And that was most important to us. It's not about like what I think is best for this community, but what this community thinks is best for themselves. People know how they want to get around. We worked on a number of different studies in the district, long-range transportation planning, neighborhood studies, and people will say, I just want to be able to go visit my grandparents who live, some blocks away from Ward 7 to Ward 8, and there's no real direct connection between those wards that doesn't take less than an hour. People want to be able to get to work or to their doctor. If you live in Ward 7 or 8, what doctor are you going to that you can go right in your neighborhood? To the doctor. So I come to this space when we talk about transportation and transportation planning and equity from thinking about folks who they just don't have a way and they're really trying to make a way. People are missing opportunities. As the Congresswoman said, they're missing access to jobs. We're working on transportation demand management in Northern Virginia, and I think about all the people who can now get to one of these, if this is the future home of Amazon, Amazon or any of these other companies, because they can do van pooling or they can do car sharing. People drive from far away, like West Virginia, to get to jobs in this area. So thinking about all of those things where we may not operate Uber and Lyft, and we really need to think about like not only just some of the car sharing that we always had, like I'm gonna catch a ride and back when I'm gonna give you some gas money on it, but really thinking about how people also get to the places that they really need to go, to the grocery stores, making sure there's infrastructure that if I wanna walk to school, that there is a sidewalk that I can walk to school. What does that infrastructure look like? Not only just a lot of times we focus on the road, but what other infrastructure is there? If I'm a pedestrian, if I'm walking on the street, is it safe for me to walk up and down this street? What does that look like? So that's what I bring to this conversation, and I too am very happy to be here today. Thank you for inviting me.
Great, thank you all for those wonderful discussions. And so what we'll do next is we'll provide some scripted questions for the panel in the interest of time, and wanted to make sure that we have as much time as we can for the audience to ask questions. I will ask one question directed to one panelist. If other panelists want to get in, they're free to do so. But in the interest of time, and again, wanted to have the audience have as much time to ask questions, because I think that's what they're here for. They want to ask you and gain from your experience and knowledge about the things that they're passionate about. We'll try to keep the other questions short and to one panelist. So I want to start off with you, Rena, specifically about Black women leaders and their perspective in really helping to shape and promote transportation equity. How can the perspective of Black women provide knowledge to really help promote equity? And then what are some of the challenges that you've seen in your work, and maybe with the work in companies with other colleagues that are in the same position as you? What are some of the challenges that are facing to really promote this as a Black woman? Can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that question. I think I was really taken by the comment you just made in terms of I don't have a way, and I think that's exactly it, right? Is that we have those understandings and experiences. We recently have acquired Motivate, which is docked bikes, and we're also starting to go into scooters. We just launched our first city where we're offering scooter share, which is in Denver, and looking to expand. And as we start to look towards the Bay Area and where I'm from in Oakland, Oakland, and I'm not sure if anybody is from the town or is you've been there, yes. And East Oakland is a mix of flat spaces and extreme hilly environments. And so when you're trying to get on the bus, there could be a bus that's a block away from you. But if you're on an e-scooter, or you're older, or it's hot outside, and you can't walk to the bus stop because it happens to be up, a steep incline, and you've got to, bring something with you, or you just can't make it mobility-wise, how is anybody who has never lived in East Oakland, who has never worked in East Oakland, who doesn't have people, family members that are still there, going to know that this bus stop that's a block away isn't really an option for someone who lacks mobility? And in certain areas, we all know that, the demographics in underserved transit areas are often, reflective of communities of color. And so in terms of, what aspect that Black women can bring to leadership around transportation in these conversations, I think it's our experiences. I think, when you talked about equity, I was kind of thinking in my head, Black women are equity. Us, having a voice, having, an ability to influence conversations is already making a huge stride towards equity. But not just, we can have a number of folks up here who are Black women who have ideas that aren't necessarily going to push those conversations forward. And so really finding, the Black talent and Black female talent that has that expertise, that has been studying and doing qualitative and quantitative research, I think has been one of the things that's been really remarkable, because, as women and as Black people, sometimes your opinions are, kind of shifted off as like, oh, that's nice, but let's hear what everyone else has to say. When you come with that specific knowledge base and that, those facts and those figures, and, your resume is as long as, all the women on this panel, they can't argue with you in terms of, your ability to infer and to get, kind of towards the root of the issues. And I think that that's something that is really a unique contribution that we're able to make. Sorry, I forgot the second part of your question.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, but I think it's just one of those things, especially when you are in a space of public policy and in corporate government relations, or even the think tanks and nonprofits. You just don't see a lot of Black women, and that's in regards, to all issues. But transportation is a place where we have a unique ability to really influence that conversation in a way that will make a difference and will provide a way for folks. And so when you have the ability to not as a private industry sit down as well with public industries and inform their conversations based on data that you have or just experiences that your users are having, and then work together to create a built environment that serves all people. I think that's the goal for us, and in terms of my ability to influence and have those conversations, that's what I've really been able to notice, is that we've strategically changed directions because of information that I have as a Black woman that I have shared, and been able to make the case internally, and it's shaped products. So that, I think, is one of my biggest accomplishments that I'm very proud of at Lyft.
Wonderful. Anybody else have to follow up on that? Go ahead.
Just to kind of echo what Rena was saying about being a Black woman in the transportation conversation, we do bring a comprehensive experience. There's plenty of studies that show that women in general travel differently. The way we make decisions about where we go, what time we go, what modes of travel we use is different than our male counterparts. In addition to that, bringing our personal experiences to the table as well. As Chauncey mentioned, in some places, the car is the number one option and there's always a car available, so you never have to think about plan B. If the car isn't working, do I call my aunt? Do I rely on a neighbor? Do I take public transportation? So as a Black woman in a conversation related transportation, we get to bring all those things to the table when people are trying to plan out and plot what's next. We can help highlight things that may not be visible to some of our colleagues who may not have had those experiences or lived in urban environments versus rural or suburban environments where the options are limited or they're not as reliable as other things that are there. I think one of the challenges there is that there is a very high bar for proving a new case. When you're presenting something to the population that isn't standard or normal, they have a very high bar of what they want you to show in order to be able to say that you can get people on side and encourage and influence the conversation that way. I think it is a challenge. I think it's something that can be absolutely overcome by having more diverse people at the table, because the more perspectives you bring, the richer the product gets. And again, same thing working at a tech company, the more that you can show the value in having different people and perspectives there and how it is a positive for not only the mission of the company, but also the company's bottom line, is definitely a way to gain favor and to continue to push that needle forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually that brings up a good point in terms of, I think in this panel represent a lot of thought leaders and folks who are really into the weeds of the policy. But for private industry, making sure that you're able to prove that business use, that this is actually going to help, and in a way that's not necessarily just related to money, right? Is that there is social capital, there's community stakeholding that we can get involved in that has huge payoffs for the company in other regards, and it does transfer to monetary once you kind of trickle it down, but it doesn't start out that way, right? And so I think that's exactly right, is that we use not only our experiences, but our ability to understand corporate, community, nonprofit, research, to kind of converge those and then be able to make some good cases.
I'm going to be a little candid here. One of the challenges that I sometimes face is being okay with being that girl who's always bringing up Black issues. You don't want to be put in a box, and you kind of shy away from sometimes saying, always ringing the drum or ringing the bell of equity, especially when you have a passion for transportation equity. So just trying to tell myself that maybe if I keep beating the drum, people will just hear the rhythm naturally, and it'll be something that they just think about as well. So coming with the facts and coming with the history of what's been going on and being able to explain that to folks in the room, and then feeling comfortable in your position and your knowledge and ability to convey the needs of a specific demographic that you represent as well is sometimes a challenge. So I just wanted to add that as well.
Great.
Yeah, and just one point to why I've started to focus on the media, especially not just trade media, but even mainstream media. How do we talk about these issues? Clearly, I have put Blackness front and center in the name of my company, in the name of my platform, and it was something that I've had to work hard to own, especially in spaces where you're the only one, especially in technical spaces. It's been difficult to really push forward, but we won't go forward if we don't own ourselves and own our pride and let people know that we're here, we're not going anywhere, we don't need to be pushed away or from being here in this conversation.
Thank you. I'd like to go to Jade, and I want to bring out a point that Rena mentioned earlier about needing the right training to really educate and promote and develop the next generation of Black women leaders in transportation. And Jade, you kind of talked about in your introductory comments about how you were able to marry your interest in engineering into a career in transportation. I would love for you to kind of talk about, what are some examples that you can talk to regarding your personal experience, and then if you want to talk to someone, a young girl who's really interested in engineering, and they may say, "Why are you interested in engineering?" And they say, "Well, I don't know why the cars do this or why the trains do this." They obviously see the intersection partially. Can you talk a little about how we can train our young women to really pursue a STEM education and use that to benefit transportation infrastructure in our community?
So that's a good question. I think more education and kind of breaking it down and explaining all the different disciplines of engineering. And like one of the things that I like to tell people is point to anything around you. There was an engineer involved in making a bottle, making a paper, whatever. And so I think kind of more exposure, and that was my problem, was I didn't have the exposure through high school. It took a teacher who specifically like took me to the corner and was like, hey, you're good at this, I want to specifically help you and expose you to this. So that's why I try to work with NSBE, that's why I work with WTS, to really try and just provide that exposure. I think that's right now the easiest and best thing to do, but also I try to, what I think is cool, it may not be cool for everybody else, but try to bring in other people and other partners to help, explain why it's important for us to be at the table. Like all of these women have said already, it's really important for us to provide our perspectives, to make impact, to bring not just in engineering and policy, but also just to kind of prove that we can do this, that we can sit at the table with you guys, and we can perform to the same ability, if not higher and better. So a lot more exposure. I was surprised. I went to a really, my high school was almost 3,000 people. It was a really good public high school. For some reason, I was never exposed to it back then. Granted, I think they have improved now the programs in high school and in middle schools. I've seen a lot. I know Toyota is also doing a lot with, schools that are local to where we're, in Texas or near our plants or anything like that. So really trying to move programs into the schools, really get them exposed, get them involved, and make it easy to digest and understand what engineering is, how you can make an impact, and what you can do with it.
Okay.
I think it's also incumbent upon the companies that are working in this space, both myself and my role, and then also I know at Uber they've done a lot of work as well in terms of reaching out to communities of color and forming very intentional partnerships. And so you have situations where that exposure can't, our schools are underfunded, there's, a lot of resources constraint, and I think that, companies do have this opportunity, right, to leverage a lot of resources, again, kind of getting back to that business need. Eventually those kids are gonna need jobs, and if they had a favorable, kind of opinion of your company, they're gonna go to your website and look for a job. So it kind of pays off in attracting candidates in the long term, but in the short term, again, back to our general policy goals, making sure that we're engaging with the communities that need access to opportunities is really important. And I'm one of the leaders of our African American ERG at Lyft, and it's a great space to have like 1 foot in government relations and 1 foot in an ERG. Employee resource group, and for me, what I've been able to do is kind of Robin Hood a little bit. So we get our and not really because everyone's fine with it, but really be able to leverage our public policy investments so that they align with the investments of our recruiting team, they align with the investments of our social impact team, because there's a lot of there are a lot of dollars out there in these companies for intentional partnerships and ones that further both, their just community engagement, but also their research stakeholding and, exploring things and getting into the nitty-gritty of details that they need. So I think that, it's definitely something that I'm sure that as engineers you all think of, and I kind of have been tech adjacent. My college boyfriend was an ME, mechanical engineer, so I've seen a lot of the amazing work that NSBE has done, but they can't do it on their own, and they can't always be the catalyst.
I just want to offer that, just on a basic level, in working with young people and helping them understand transportation, when you leave your house to go anywhere, you have to choose how you're getting there. Whether you're walking, taking a bike, getting in a car, there has to be a road that you get on. There is some connection between where you are now and where you want to go. I'm sure everyone today decided how they were getting to the convention center, whether they were taking Uber, Lyft, the metro, whether it was gonna be during rush hour, if you felt like dealing with people, you know, you had to figure whether you're gonna get on the bus, you know, and which bus to get on, whether you're gonna, if you're from DC, whether you're gonna get on the X2 and walk up through Chinatown, you're gonna get on the circular. You had to make a decision. But before all of those decisions are even made, there is somebody who planned those bus routes. Someone had to be involved in that. Someone makes sure that the bus routes go through certain neighborhoods, which of course probably brings some form of economic development. That's a whole other conversation, but just even the roadways. We know that if you live east of the river and there is, because I got caught in this one time, there's like a marathon in town or something like that, you are essentially cut off from the rest of the city, because they're gonna block the bridges and all that stuff, and you can't get anywhere. So if you ever tried to go somewhere and you had to go all the way around to get there, or just you stuck riding on the bus, circumventing different things, then you understand the importance of transportation planning. Even before you get to the engineering and the design work, that there is importance in the planning of how do we get people from point A to point B? How do we make sure that there are different modes of transportation? When I first moved to DC, Veronica, we were running late for a meeting. Veronica's like, oh, we can take Capital Bike Share. And I was like, we don't ride bikes in Alabama, we get in a car. Like even if the building is across the street, you don't walk across the street. You get in your car from this parking lot and you go to the parking lot across the street. That's what we do. We didn't have time. I was like, I haven't been on a bike since I was in high school. And when I got on that bike, I felt free. I was like, I am calling myself Wind in her afro. Okay, because I felt so free. I was like, I didn't have to wait on the next bus. You know, I had freedom. And I think that even just planning that out and making sure people have all the options, you know, are able to see all the options so that they can get to where they need to go, and like letting those decisions are already happening. If you ever ride Metro early in the morning, you're riding with a bunch of high school kids. And so, you know, even they had to plan out their day in terms of how they're getting to school. So this is stuff that they're already thinking about, but they don't necessarily know how it's happening. Who is making those decisions for them?
So I actually want to add on, you just reminded me of something. I actually participated in a talk at a local high school, and I provided an activity on how to solve the transportation problems that you've seen in the DC area with automated vehicles. Because my role is mostly focused on safety and mobility and access, I pick out any problem. The fatalities on our U.S. roads are increasing, especially pedestrian fatalities, bicyclist fatalities, and we have a lot of that in DC area. So I had the kids, I made it very, just like you said, it's something that they have to deal with every day. You see problems, you see people speeding through lights, you see people not being able to get access, or you know, if they have to use paratransit, it takes too long, it costs too much money. If they have elderly grandparents or parents, what are these different issues that you see in your day-to-day life as far as transportation? And they jumped all over it. They were so excited. They're like, oh my God, if we have autonomous vehicles, we could solve this problem. People could stop speeding. People could stop running over people, you know, get into crashes and that kind of stuff. And these are high school students. And these were all women. This is part of the WTS program that I work with. But just kind of, just following on what you said, just making it very real to them. Yeah. But like, this is your day-to-day. You can solve these problems. You can be a factor to solve these problems that people have to deal with every single day, every minute, or whatever. So. Yeah.
Let me just actually, moving on for time, I want to kind of piggyback off Jade's point on safety and direct the question to you, Nadia, regarding, you know, safety, especially for the Black community. As many of us know, we are disproportionately affected by pedestrian deaths and other, you know, unfortunate avoidable deaths by cars and other things like that. So Nadia, you work in this space for Uber. How can we really tackle this issue of these ever-increasing pedestrian deaths in our communities? Is there a suite of solutions? Is there one, you know, magical thing that we can do when everything gets solved? I mean, can you talk a little about how we really got to tackle pedestrian safety, and especially in our community?
So I think there are a suite of things that we can do in order to address that disproportionate impact that we see in not only the Black community, but also in the brown community as well, and also in lower income neighborhoods. Yes. And it all focuses on taking a comprehensive approach to the issue. So first, looking at the communication that comes out from everybody who's working in the road safety space and making sure that it's speaking to the actual community and to the issue that's happening there in a manner that resonates and is actionable. That happens by having people who are diverse at the table. So you can say, I'm from Alexandria, and we do this. This is how we cross the street. I know what happens here, so I can better target it. You can take more of an epidemiological approach to it, as opposed to sort of doing like a blanket buckshot that may not catch anyone. I think the other thing, too, is also doing the things like Chauncey was mentioning, like Jade was mentioning, like Rena was mentioning, like everybody on the panel was talking about getting the next generation of problem solvers excited and engaged about the issue, letting them understand that there's a various ways, various avenues that they can also participate in the conversation and also really be impactful there. I think the other thing that a part of that solution is working more closely with governments and organizations. The way that data is reported is great, but sometimes there's a little bit of a lag and a disconnect. Being able to get data out there in a manner that people can understand, that the average person can understand. I know the US DOT recently had a data visualization challenge where they essentially were asking people who work not only in tech, but in other walks of life to figure out how to better present what you're seeing happening on the road in a manner that the average person can go and say, this is my neighborhood, this is what's happening. I think continuing to do those things means that you're going to reach the population that you need, specifically the Black and brown community, and then be able to work towards proven countermeasures. And it's a continuous cycle of engagement that has to happen and having the right people at the table. I do a lot of work with the Vision Zero community, the Road to Zero community. I attended the Washington Bicycle Association's conference that happened here, and there was an excellent panel on transportation equity and its impact on minority communities. And one of the things that was happening was the fact that the conference was happening in the middle of the day, 12 o'clock to 4 o'clock. And the conversation was saying, if you want to be able to target those communities of concern, you may need to have this later so people from the community can come and contribute to it. They know firsthand what's happening on the road. They know if there is an infrastructure problem, meaning the lanes aren't marked, nobody sees that stop sign, those lights aren't timed. But you're not going to get that feedback if you're having that conversation in a silo that's removed from the group you want to do. So I think in order to address the overall safety thing, you not only have to be comprehensive, but you also have to be inclusive. And sometimes it means thinking outside of the box and doing things that we may not have traditionally done from a road safety POV. New research needs to come out. New ways of engaging the public, new countermeasures, all those things are going to help us be able to get there. So that's the long of the short of what I think needs to happen.
Thank you, Sharon.
And can I jump in here? I feel like for me, the platform that I've created is one way that we're reaching people. Again, this is a Googling generation. Again, we all Google. And so when you're thinking about, well, how do I fix my street? How do I overcome that I've been blocked into my neighborhood? How do I overcome, say, more violent activities, say police violence or other violence in my community? How do I overcome this? So being there when somebody's sitting on their phone, especially our youth, and they're thinking about, well, how do I fix this? How do I get my voice out there? And again, I'm so happy to be here with a lot of other planners and engineers, but this is definitely a conversation that all of us need to have in some form or fashion. It shouldn't just take going to school or taking the technical time to do it. These are dinner table conversations. These are life and death conversations. We need to be having these conversations and also work with stripping the shame of having, having to use alternatives or, what it's meant in the past to be locked away from transportation options or just options to get around. So essentially being sort of on the front line, being an independent resource, being a resource for people to find how can you be an advocate? How can you be a technology person? How can you help your grandmother or your aunt and uncle to get to where they need to go? Where do you find those solutions and where do you find those places? And again, having it not that I will partner with people, clearly we're partnering today, but essentially having a place to go for people to find the things that they need. And not just in the sense of transportation as technology, transportation as engineering, but transportation as a way of life.
Richard, I just want to add here that I think that we also have to think about who the most vulnerable user is on the street, and that's a pedestrian. Like a pedestrian and a car, they just cannot compete each other. You're gonna lose every time as a pedestrian. And engineers are still trained to design for cars, not necessarily for pedestrians who are on the street. They are not seen as the primary concern. It's about moving people up and down the roadway. And so until academia also catches up in the way that engineers are trained in a lot of positions in a lot of cities, the engineers who are designing roadways in your street, they are in a room doing that. They are not at this Congressional Black Caucus forum. They are not at any of the bike conferences and the walk conferences. They are designing a way. Okay, and so they are not. They may put a sidewalk there, but they're not thinking about some of the most vulnerable vulnerable users. We led Vision Zero in the district, and people. I was just astounded the number of people who knew someone who either was killed in a crash, or the number of people who themselves were like they were hit by a car before. They had been hit by a car. And especially now with distracted driving and distracted pedestrians, because y'all walk across the street on our phone too. But just designing for our most vulnerable users. In the district, we worked on a project for inclusive transit that looked at abilities. Designing for someone who uses a wheelchair is not the same as designing for someone who's blind. And we kind of lump everybody with different abilities together. And I think that when we talk about, that really hasn't come up in this conversation, but designing for all users and looking at who those most vulnerable users are who are on the street.
One of the things that this conversation, this last couple of comments, especially Nadia's comment, brought up for me, yours too, was, actually this had a very real impact in my life this weekend. I'm currently moving, so I'm going back and forth. And the main road, 55th and MacArthur, if anybody's from East Oakland, was blocked off, and there was yellow tape. And then I had to go around, and when I had gotten off the freeway, it was also blocked off. So there was a big section, and didn't know, hopped on Nextdoor, as we do now, and to see what folks were saying. And unfortunately and tragically, someone had been killed, a pedestrian, who was walking down the street and had to get out into the bike lane because of an obstruction was hit. This individual was African American. He was young. He was homeless. He was somebody who lived in the community and everyone saw around. And this area of East Oakland is not known for a lot of encampments, so he was just someone that you would see. And to know that he passed away in that particular area and that intersection was very alarming to me, but also very not surprising. They did a road diet. They took, and I'm not sure if I assume everyone knows what that is, but they took down the lanes from two on each side to one, and put in a bike lane that's unprotected. And then there's also this thing that drives me crazy, but there's a dotted line at a certain point because you have to cross the bike lane to get to the stop sign. It's a very odd design in Oakland, but our streets a lot of times were designed for not just cars, but actually for trains. And so a lot of the places in Oakland, there's a system called the Key System, which was like a very old school metro. And that system, they constructed the roads, so you have this weird situation where there's a train and a car that were supposed to be right next to each other, but now there's no train. And so the roads are still designed that way. And at Lyft, it was really interesting. We have a whole team of planners, and they took a stretch of Wilshire Boulevard in LA and redesigned it and reimagined it as if we were designing it just for pedestrians. And that's one of the things that our co-founders are very dedicated to, is reimagining cities so that we're not focused on parking, we're not focused on vehicles, that we're focused on people. And I think a big part of that is going to be autonomous vehicles and a lot of the different multimodal things that we've been talking about, and not just making sure that they're available, but making sure that they're available in the areas where they're needed. You talked about docked bikes and getting on Capitol Bike Share and feeling free. And one of the big things that we are planning to do with our acquisition of Motivate is to literally expand it into those underserved areas. And when we hired a bike and pedestrian policy person to come on the team, and we started talking about this, I already had a map set up. If I'm like, this is where we need a station, this is where we need a station, because I understand, the community, but I think it's really inherent that we continue to think about these deaths and also to think about the fact that our community makes up the vast majority of them.
Thank you. Regarding the different technologies, Stephanie, I want to direct this question to you from the agency standpoint. You talked in your introduction about looking at dockless bike shared, electric scooters. We've referenced AVs. Can you kind of talk about how these new ways of transporting are changing cities today? And as you mentioned, from your perspective, as the lone Black woman in your space, how do you provide insight in these new technologies so that when the agencies like the DDOT plan their streets, that they do consider equity and accessibility in their discussions. Can you-
Sure. So I will say that I'm not the lone Black woman in my space, luckily.
Okay,
I
good.
want to give a shout out to Kim Lucas, who has been running Capital Bike Share for
Oh, yeah,
years
very
now.
much, yes.
so.
Kim's a good friend, yeah, very good, good.
Yeah, so we talked a lot about so Chauncey talked about a way, right? So the more options that we have available to people, the more ways people have to get around. So adding scooters and bikes and, supplementing what Capital Bike Share already provides in terms of active transportation, improving bike lanes, so adding protected bike lanes and cycle tracks, and providing a space and an atmosphere where people expect more than cars to be in the streetscape, and then drivers act appropriately, and they realize they can't speed through areas because there might be bikes, there might be pedestrians, providing sidewalks for folks to walk on and be able to travel through their neighborhood. All those things increase the options that people have to travel around, and in doing that, we're also redesigning the city. So when you talk about reimagining the city, I think one thing that's very important is to have our voices in the conversation. Having people who understand the needs of cities and the needs of people who aren't at the table. So the people who don't have the social capital to be at that conversation and explain and talk about what they need in terms of designing a city. Having people who understand that and can bring that to the table as well, which is where I think that our perspective as Black women are very critical to those conversations.
So I'd want to add to that. I think we, as Toyota, does a really good job in trying to get people out to really understand all the different issues, understand what possibilities or what solutions might be needed to address all the various different issues that we have in transportation. It's not just safety, it's not just access, it's not just mobility, there's a lot more. So I know it's not going to be safety, access, mobility is not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. It's not just going to be rideshare. It's not. There's going to be personally owned vehicles. There's going to be people who never want to drive. How do we provide them transportation? You have people with disabilities, of different kinds of disabilities, mental, physical, all of that. And we are doing a really good job in trying to explore all the different areas. If you've seen, watched the Olympics, we had a lot of ad campaigns around Star Turn Possible. And we've really kind of taken that to our core to really understand, and we've shifted from just a traditional car company manufacturer to a mobility company, which I'm really excited about because we're really expanding, thinking outside the box. We're being pushed by our leadership to really think outside of the box. And so I was actually just at a headquarters yesterday in Plano, Texas, and I met with some of our social innovation folks, and they're doing incredible work that I had no idea that they were doing. They're really going out and trying to figure out how to provide transportation, provide affordable transportation in underserved communities, and handle the first last mile problem with public transportation. And we don't see ourselves as like a competitor to them, but more so kind of how can we supplement, how can we help with our resources, but also what can we do to provide more resources to these people. We've also gone beyond just cars. We have groups working on indoor mobility for people who are blind, for people who might not be able to get around their houses. I think that's really awesome work. And it's not just cars, it's just mobility in any way, shape, or form. Really excited about to see what our company's going to do moving forward.
And I'll just add on to that as well. Having folks in the industry, so having OEMs and TNCs on this panel, and being kind of in the public sector space, I really think there's an opportunity to expand the conversation, to have industry folks talking to transportation agencies and building up that conversation, that back and forth between the folks who are doing a lot of the innovating and the people who are actually implementing those innovations.
Yeah, and so I was just actually telling Chauncey before the panel, actually our DC office, we do a lot of engagement with the public agencies. So I was attending a couple of workshops from Federal Highway Administration, helping them understand from an automotive perspective what we are doing to provide autonomous vehicles, what you guys from an infrastructure, from a planning perspective, can do to help us and how we can work together. So like I said, I think we do a pretty good job of trying to work with all the different stakeholders to not be working in silos and then we have two competing products. So.
Well, okay, so I'll leave the last question before we open the questions up to the audience. One of the big discussions, especially in this space, is women who start their own businesses in transportation infrastructure. As we know, there's challenges when you sign stuff as a disadvantaged business enterprise, a DBE, or minority business, especially for Black women. There are sporadic ones. I know the Women in Transportation Seminar has like a listing of all the DBEs on their website. I took a look at that yesterday, did my research, yes. But it's still, a space where there's challenges for Black women. So I think this question is really tailored to you, Chauncey, because you co-founded one with another woman. So tell us about the challenges of running disadvantaged business enterprises, but also some of the successes and the positive, experience you've had in starting your own business as two Black women in this transportation infrastructure space and really, achieving a high level of success. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Pay me my money on time.
All right.
That is the challenge.
It's number one.
that is a real challenge of business, particularly disadvantaged businesses, is one, access to capital, because we usually don't have the resources, particularly service-based. If you're selling T-shirts, it's a transaction. Somebody give you a T-shirt, you give them money, you got your money. But particularly for people who are in service-based businesses like working in transportation and environmental, is that I do work, but I may not see money from that work to 3-4 months after it happened, waiting on a check from whoever to get to my office. So that's a real problem, but access to capital in the forefront, many of us don't have anywhere to get a loan from. And I always just talk about when I talk on small business forums is that when we started Inspire Green, it was 2009, middle of the recession, and we was like, it would be so smart to start a company right now. But we took the little savings that we had in 401k because we weren't old. We hadn't had a lot of money saved up. And we started our company. And we thought that people were going to hire us because we had education and we looked good, and that didn't pan out for us. So we underestimated the time it took to build relationships, but also we went to banks. And they were like, can you give us $50,000 and show us your $50,000 collateral? And I was like, well, if I had $50,000, I wouldn't be in here asking you for any money, So access to capital and finding non-traditional resources, meaning like the people who gave us our big break was the community, WACA, which is a community development financial institution, which gives microloans. And that was enough for us to pay ourselves a little salary to get started. And we have won our first DDOT contract. And from that, we've been able to certainly expand. So access to capital is one, but also from a disadvantaged business enterprise. I heard you talk about having that DBE and what that does. It also marginalizes you because although I may have the same experience, the same capabilities, the same education, if the contract says that there's a 15% DBE, you will only want me, you don't even want me to do 15%. You want me to do like 3%, and you're gonna split the rest amongst like 10 other companies, but only 15% of that contract. And so that's like a major challenge in terms of working in this space. But the successes, I will say, for me are far greater in actually being able to work on projects that we love and to determine what projects I want to do and those that I don't want to do. To be able to engage communities and really do the work that I like and feel like I'm making an impact and I'm able to bring different voices to the table that otherwise may not be heard. To me, those are some of the successes in business. To be able to hire people to work for our company, and I feel like we're more a training ground, like people come work for us for a couple years and then they can move on into another profession, but being able to hire folks. That some people want to be like solopreneurs, that's what they want to do the rest of their life. We were building a company, and so being able to give other people an opportunity, especially what I've learned over the years, is giving people an opportunity that, sometimes our resume don't look like everybody else's resume. It isn't that we don't have experience, we just don't know how to write our resume right, and use the right language and the right words and all that type of stuff. But giving people a chance who otherwise it's been hard for them to get in the door. So I think that we've had some really great people to work at Inspire Green. We've been able to work on some really great projects now kind of almost across the nation. And so that's what I'm most proud of being able to be an employer, being able to really work on projects that impact our community and make sure that that voice, because I don't have any problem with representing for black folks when I'm at the table. Like, people know that if I'm in the room and you say something off, I'm gonna say something. You know what I mean? I don't have a problem with bringing up that equity perspective. You can put whatever boxes around that, but you're gonna have to address it.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna have to address it. So I really appreciate the positives in that way.
Can I talk about
Go
that
ahead, Kristen.
as well?
Well,
So I'm still kind of in the startup phase. I'm definitely in the solopreneur phase, and I also still deal with some of the same things, because in addition to doing media work, I also do planning work. I'm often coming in at the very beginning of a project to get the communities ready. And, you know, often firms like Chauncey's and Veronica's, they often finish, but we do similar things. And if you're not familiar with how service contracting works and everything, it's very much like she said. It's down the line, it's years after. Some plans don't even come to fruition. One of the challenges I've had, and I know you've had, is when you have to come into communities and you have to work with them to say, we would like for this to happen, but there's a lot of other factors here. There are the other firms that are primary firms that work with us. There's the jurisdictions that have hired us that may or may not want to go forward with what we've planned. If this was just us and our money 100%, and we could just build something tomorrow, build a train or build a bus stop, that would be us. But we don't necessarily have that advantage. But for me, the joy has been able to really change the conversation, push the conversation forward, and to really be able to do something I've been passionate about and know that I'm not crazy for having this idea that this is something that should be in the world.
I'm glad that Toyota could be related to this panel, and I think Jade's doing an excellent job. I got my eye on you. You are definitely going to be doing more work with us.
Hey.
And
Drop promotion.
you know, I just think that this is so powerful. It's unfortunate, and Dr. Anderson, you also will be on my list. But we have to do more of this, you know, and we can't use CBC as the only platform. We got to get out and get you in business and start you talking to some of the OEMs, start you talking to some of the other organizations, because I think there is some inertia building around young women in STEM. I am the father of a chemical engineer graduate out of Washington University, and she is doing some amazing things. But, you know, for such a long time, I felt like she was an anomaly. Now I'm looking here, and I got, you know, 6 other young sisters doing virtually the same thing. It is, we got something going. We got to keep it going. But we got to keep the dialogue going as well. So thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. Again, I am going to engage you all in some of our work, so prepare yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. We have one question at the back there, and then we'll go here.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Namotalai Aziz. I'm currently a Capital City Fellow with District Government. I'm currently working on safety and transportation initiatives as it relates to students. And I just want to say that I'm extremely motivated by hearing all of your stories today and the work that you do. And my question is, in the beginning, a lot of you had mentioned being able to, if you are that only black female voice at the table, being able to come with the facts. And I was just curious, with all the information and sensory overload that we're constantly getting on a daily basis, what are some of the sources that you go to or that you find that are particularly helpful in conversations around equity?
So we'll, in just a time, we'll just have 2 people answer the question, please. Thank you.
So I'll start. There's a ton of sources out there. It all depends specifically on what it is that you're looking to show. It also figuring out what resonates with the audience you're looking to capture. So if you're talking to a certain group about equity, you need to know what their levers are, like what matters to them. Because you can't point to a source that they are not either already familiar with or don't think is valuable or credible. A lot of the work that I do, I pull from NHTSA very heavily, because everybody recognizes that the government is the convening body of it. When it comes to talking about different incomes or outcomes for certain socioeconomic groups, the Vision Zero organization does a good job, too, of being able to say we focused on LA, we're looking at these things. This is why we're focusing, and specifically focusing here. The other source of information, too, there's PolicyLink has a Transportation Equity Caucus, so being able to plug into them, too. They have a conference. I think it happens either every year or every other year, but they also, too, have like all the minds come together. They share their sources. They share the work that they're working on. So being able to figure out what's going to resonate with the audience and then tapping into different forms to be able to prove that case is what's been helpful for me.
Okay, good. Let's go to the next question. Anybody else?
Good afternoon. My name is Kristen Clarkson. I've worked in transportation on and off for about 8 years, but I am on the communication side. So with that and all the great information that you've given out, how can people on the communication side kind of get more into the policy, more into the research? Of course, you talk to your researchers and your engineers because you have to get that information out. But I'm kind of in a position now where, you know, to the gentleman's point, hey, all this information's out here. There's young black girls. I'm on the STEAM side because I'm an artsy area, but I think it's all important, STEM and STEAM. So how do you kind of use that information that you've gained over the years to bring it out to a more diverse audience and just kind of get the word out, the type of stuff that's happening, and also use that knowledge to, use your platform to get that knowledge out and also just talk to, because it is kind of hard to understand the science side, for me anyway, and probably a lot of people, but what suggestions do you all have on that, in that area?
Yeah. For me, basically, like I said, I just sat down and started writing one day. You know, like I said, I have a undergrad in communication, and then my master's is in public affairs. So like I said, I do still lean more towards the STEAM side of things, but it's really sitting down and just taking a look at it, and then being willing to reach out again to our friends who are more technically related and say, you know, this is something that I want to understand, and I definitely want to translate this for folks who can't even get to where I'm at, but bare minimum basics, how do I get that information there? And like I said, for me, I'm starting to put in systems of things that I look for, everything from Google alerts to certain, you know, Twitter accounts to certain other websites and resources. And for myself, as well as just knowing how we process information, just working through that. And then just knowing, you know, just how we are. It may seem like we all know each other, but we don't all know each other. It may seem like there's nobody, but there are somebody. So really pushing through, and like I said, continuing to have this conversation outside of this room, looking to social media, looking to, you know, anything from the census to all the different places that do post information, but kind of doing it slightly independently sometimes of the social media channels, because sometimes you can kind of get caught up in what's being posted versus what's there and what you can Google and what you can search for yourself. You know, the libraries are still there and helpful. There are a lot of transportation librarians. I come to TRB every year right here in this space, and so there are folks there that think through these things that aren't just engineers and planners. So, and again, you know, feel free to reach out to me. We can definitely talk shop on communication.
Also, transportation is a thing that everybody experiences. So it's something that you can easily relate to any individual on. So being able to kind of take yourself out of the engineering or the planning or the technical space and just communicate, well, how do you get to this one place? Well, what do you see wrong with that? How would you improve that? So being able to just talk about your daily experience in interacting with the transportation system.
As a newly invented STEAM person, I didn't know that term, but I like to call it the soft sciences, is, you know, one of the things is vocabulary, right? And all these acronyms that folks who, you know, all these doctors and you know, planners are using, I don't know them, but they're easy to find out what they mean. And I think that figuring out what the language of, you know, certain areas is helps you to then tackle those more scientific or complex documents so that, you know, okay, I know what that term means. I know what a road diet is. I had no idea what a road diet was 3 years ago. So that, I mean, but now it's something I think about actively because I know the terminology. I think also in terms of, you know, you hit it right on the head, that translation piece. You know, training yourself to become a translator as someone who is, you know, not a technical person, even though I have a JD lawyer by training, but, you know, those things only help you so much and they're not considered technical. So I think really improving the skills or building up your skills around, how do you kind of navigate spaces where you're unfamiliar. One of the things I love about Michelle Obama's raising of her children was that she said, pick a sport that you like, that you're good at, do that, and then pick a sport that you don't like, and figure and see how it feels to get better at something that you don't know anything about and that you really don't even want to do. And I think that skill set really has served me well in terms of figuring out things. Now, I'll read a medical report. I like to research. If you like to research, if you like to read, I think it's actually pretty easy, even if you don't have that technical training as a planner, as someone who's an engineer. And for me, I've actually kind of built a career off of that. When I was an attorney, I was in intellectual property litigation. And I really had to fight like heck to get into that space because I did not have an engineering degree. And I really sold myself as this translator. I'm someone who can come in and explain everything that you guys are saying in your jargon and then make it make sense to a judge and a jury who are only there for a split second. And that's something that has really been useful in a lot of different capacities. But I think it's really just throwing yourself in there, knowing that you don't know any of these things, but sitting with these types of folks and learning from them, and before you know it, you start to kind of sound like you know what you're talking about because you do know what you're talking about. You might not have that in-depth training, but you've scratched the surface enough, and like you said, you've been on and off in this space for 8 years. I'm sure that you already have a huge wealth of knowledge, and that just if you are interested in kind of diving deeper into the technical aspects, it really is like getting with some of the folks, getting a little bit of mentoring. And I think that what's one of the really amazing things about Black women who have risen up the ranks and who are in these sorts of positions is that a lot of us feel an obligation to pay it forward. And we're always open to having those conversations. I can tell you how many times I've had chats with folks who have just hit me up randomly on LinkedIn because they want to get into tech policy and they're, kind of starting out in their career. So I think that that's definitely for me one of the ways that I've been able to navigate a highly technical career space without any real technical skills.
Yeah. Great. Liz, do you have one more question? I should go back there.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much already for the wonderful comments from each of the panelists. My name is Melissa Gray, and I'm with the National Aging and Disability Transportation Center. And so gerontologist now in the transportation space. And a large part of the work that we do is providing grant funding to local communities to develop transportation innovations in their areas. And so I just wanted to hear from maybe a few of the panelists to just kind of share with me your experiences or your perspectives, maybe not in your personal roles, but in your organizations, on how you're engaging these target groups in inclusive planning in transportation.
I actually love this question. I'm sorry, I had to get back on the mic, but I had a very long conversation with the Colorado Department of Aging that's studying kind of this transition of boomers out of the workforce and what that's going to mean, and literally the tens of thousands of folks that are going to be having this transition. And it was very early on in my time at Lyft, and it was so fascinating to think about these issues because here you have the first generation of aging adults that completely understand how to get a ride on Lyft or Uber, that are comfortable with AVs, the concept at least. Maybe they are not going to get into the first one, and so I think it really behooves us to pay attention to this. And it's a huge, again, that business need. There's a huge business need as people age in place. People are going to, giving up your car isn't as big a deal if you know that you can call up a Lyft, or if Lyft is taking too long, you call up an Uber, or if those kinds of accessibility aspects for aging adults is going to be something that I think is going to be monumentally transforming. For my mother's generation, she's in her early 60s, like that, and she's not giving up her car anytime soon. But the fact that she is now at age 60 getting comfortable with app-based technologies and technologies. She'd probably be very mad at me if she heard me talking about her like this in terms of the aging population. But I do think that it's something that we're going to have a huge opportunity to. And one of the things, and you mentioned disability, that I've been wanting to put a pin in to come back to is funding for disability services, and then also this concept of needing capital for entrepreneurs who are in this space. I work I run our California government relations. There was just a bill that was passed that we worked really heavily with the author on, SB 1376, if you guys want to look it up. But it basically levies a small fee onto every TNC ride and then uses that money to create a fund that then individuals can apply to groups that are providing services, transportation services to individuals who have varying levels of ability. Motorized wheelchairs is the emphasis, but having those funds available, kind of basically Robin Hooding a little bit and taking that and kind of creating this cash fund for folks to access and draw down from, kind of takes that need of, you don't have, the $50,000 that you need to get the $50,000, but you do have access to a lot of these sources. And so I think one of the things that would be great to do, and I'm sure there's a lot of folks that are working on this, that we would love to be a part of it, is to figure out how to resource, kind of bank all of those programs, your grants, the money from 1376, and figuring out how to leverage that so that there is a lot of money that's already out there for folks. They just don't know about it, they don't know how to access it, and how do we help to empower folks to be able to experiment in these spaces and to iterate quickly, because sometimes government can't do that, but they can do it by funding folks for trials and programs and pilots in these spaces. So that's one way that I think that we can collaborate on those efforts.
And just to add on a little bit, that's absolutely something that we think about very deeply at Uber as well. Part of it starts with our mission is to be a mobility platform and an option for everyone. So everyone means including those communities. The way that we're approaching it is there's someone that sits on the same team, the policy research team, that focuses solely on accessibility and underserved communities, but then having that person be able to engage more deeply with the community, to understand the need, to understand how they understand our product. We talk about the baby boomers and those trying to age in place. There's a convergence of technology and transportation that wasn't present when they were there. So making sure that there are no gaps in understanding how the technology works, how the product works, and then building a level of comfort there. The other piece is also understanding what the challenges may be. Is there something that we could think about differently in how we design our product, how we talk about our product, how we engage in outreach with that community to make sure that we're able to start and serve their needs there. I think we've done some really great things up to date working with organizations like AARP and trying to figure out how to get out there better, how to understand what we should be doing, and the plan is to continue to build on that to be able to address that population. Because again, it aligns with our mission. Like, we can't be for everyone if we can't reach everyone or serve everyone.
I also think just from a planning and infrastructure, engineer design perspective, when those projects are actually happening, for us, it's been on projects where we've had the opportunity, it's been as simple as having a meeting during the daytime, changing the meeting hours, because a lot of seniors don't come out at night so that they can fully participate. It's been working with service-based organizations that may serve those seniors who, seniors usually let people know how they feel about stuff. And so people are able to give us input on, the senior community. It's meeting people where they are. We've had what we call pop-up meetings on street corners. So as people are getting off buses, they can actually give input on whatever is happening in their community, whatever that project is about. So meeting people where they are and making sure that when you talk about equity, equity isn't just about race all the time, but it also includes like people who are seniors, who are aging in place. It includes different types of communities. So if you say you want input from seniors, then you can't have a meeting at 7 o'clock at night, especially in the fall. You can't have a meeting at 7 o'clock at night. They're just not going to show up.
Yeah. Well, I think we need to wrap it up, but please give a round of applause to our wonderful panel. I think, like I said, throughout this last 2 hours, we've heard some really great insights on just how these young, amazing women have really impacted the transportation infrastructure space in such a amazing and positive way. And I really hope that from the comments you've heard today, you're motivated. Even if you don't even work on transportation, you understand how that it impacts your daily lives, all of us. It impacts us in different ways, and even if we don't work in that space. So I really hope that you all were encouraged. I hope you all were motivated by the great comments shared by the panelists here. And I really encourage you to go out and make a change in your community to make sure that transportation equity and accessibility is highlighted. So again, thank you all. Have a great rest of the day. So before you all leave, I want to make sure we get a picture with me included too, with y'all. And then of course we'll have a few minutes to do some networking and sharing of business cards. If you didn't get a lunch, as you see, there's a lot of boxes. Please take them. So again, thank you all. Have a great day. She was just here.
Yeah, but just.
Well, maybe you gotta do something different.